Welcome to another Power BI video. You can already find some videos about Power BI right here on the channel. But all these videos talk about Power BI Desktop, the local application that you can simply download and then, run locally on your machine. But what if you want more? What if you want to share your results with other people? Well, then you need Power BI Service, the cloud application. So why don't we just start a little project that also includes Power BI Service? Before we start the project, let's take a quick look at the structure. Because in this video, we will start with the first step. And this first step starts in Power BI Desktop with the connection to the source files. After we connected Power BI Desktop to these source files, we will then work in the query editor. And in this query editor, we can simply prepare or clean our source data. This means we will simply define what type of information we want to load into our actual data model. Well, and this data model brings us to our second step, and by that to the second part of this project. Because as soon as we loaded the data into the data model, we will work with DAX, with the Data Analysis Expression Language. This is simply the formula language that Power BI uses in the data model. After we created some formulas, we will then take a look at the report. This means in Power BI Desktop simply that we will create some visuals, some charts actually. And this is actually what we will do in the second video, and by that in the entire first part of the project, that is locally in Power BI Desktop. But then comes the third part. And in this third part, we will take a look at Power BI Service. As I said, this is the cloud application. And with that, we will learn how to publish our information that we created in Power BI Desktop to this cloud application. We will see how we can create a dashboard. And finally, also learn how we can share our dashboard and our report with other people. This is what we want to do in this project. Well, and as I said, in this video, we will directly start with the project with the first step. This means we need Power BI Desktop and we need source files. So let's take a look at that right now. So right here, I have an empty Power BI Desktop project. If you're not sure what you can see right here, just take a look at another video I made. Because in this video, I will guide you through all the necessary steps to, download Power BI Desktop and then to finally arrive at this screen. So as we got this right now, we need to connect Power BI Desktop to our source files first. And to do this, we can simply go to the query editor by clicking right here, right there. This is that editor that we will use in this video to clean and prepare our data. And then click onto New Source right here. Here you can see that you have lots of different data sources available in Power BI Desktop. But we will focus onto one specific source type. And this is the CSV file. So we will click onto this button right here and press Connect like that. Then you need to navigate to the folder where you saved your source files to. And which source files? Well, you can find the link to the source files, of course, down there in the video description. If you download that, then you can see these 3 source files. And we need to connect Power BI Desktop to all these 4 files. So let's do this by selecting the first file and pressing Open right here. And pressing OK, because this looks OK. We will take care about that in a few seconds. Then I can press New Source, Text CSV, and select the second file. This is also fine, so we can press OK. And then select the third file. Also press OK. And select the last file, so the fourth file, right here, this one. Like that. And with that, we can now start preparing our data. As I said, it's important that you work in this query editor first before you load the data into your model. Because the information right here might contain data that you don't want to have in your data model, or might even be in a structure that you don't want to have in this actual data model. So let's start with the first query. You can find your queries right here in that left column. Well, and the first thing we can see right here is that we have the rides per day and the passengers. But this should be actually not a single column, this should be 2 different columns. So how can we change that? Well, we can simply select the column by clicking right here and then go to another ribbon, because right here we are in the home ribbon right there. But if you select the transform ribbon right there, Well, then you can find different options on how you want to work with that columns and rows. And in our case, it would be a good idea to go to the split column option right there. If we select that, and well, then select by delimiter, because we can see that, well, this line right here, this should be a delimiter. So we click right there. And if we drag it right here, well, then we can see that Power BI automatically selected the right delimiter in our case. So this is fine. And then we can define when it should be split. So when the column should be split. So at each time when the delimiter occurs, or at the left or rightmost. In our case, we can select the leftmost actually and press OK right here. And now you can see two things. The first thing you can see is, of course, that, well, the column was split into two columns, which is awesome. But you can also see that in this right column right here, you have the applied steps. And we see that change type right here. And we see that split column by delimiter. Well, that change type simply happened because Power BI automatically defined or identified the data format of our new column. You can see this right here, because if you click onto that, well, then you can see that Power BI identified that new column as a whole number. This is important. So if you simply download Power BI Desktop and don't change the options, which is something we won't do in this project, then this automatic data detection is allowed. And by that, Power BI automatically identifies, well, the data format, as I just said. So this is an important thing. We split the column and we can see all the applied steps so far right here in this column. If you would click right here, for example, onto this X now, like this, well, then you can see that the data format changed from a whole number to a text. This is also important. This applied steps column allows you not only to see what steps you applied, but also to undo specific steps. Well, in our case, we want to keep the format as a whole number, so we can simply click right here and do the same thing right there. Well, and with that, we now almost finished the work in our first query right here. There is only one last thing that I would like to change, and this is the column name. So you have to simply double click it right here and select that second part and press enter. Then we name that rights per day. And if we go to the second column and select the first part and delete that last part and press enter, well, then we have the rights per day and the passengers named correctly and formatted correctly. This is great. Let's now take a look at the second query right there in this column, like that. Well, here we can see that we have, again, a date column. If you go back to the first one, you see it's an equal column actually. But this query now contains basically the trip distance right here. And then actually the revenue, so the fare, some extra payment, the tax, and the tip. So that's important to know because we will need that information in a few minutes. We kind of have information for the same dates in this first query, but related to the rights per day and the passengers, and in the second query, but they're related to the distance and to the revenue. This is interesting. But if we look at this query now, well, we see that this basically looks fine. So no need to change anything right here. Let's go to the third query then, right there. Well, if you look at that, you can see that we have two columns. This is now 2014. That's important maybe because the first two queries refer to 2013. Now we have the next year. And as I said, we have these two columns, which is basically fine. But these nulls right here, I don't think we want them in our data model later. So we should make sure that these null rows are excluded from our data model. To do this, we have different options now. I will show you one option. And this is simply to apply a filter. And to apply a filter in Power BI Desktop, you simply click right here onto this arrow. Well, and then you can see the null right here. So if we tick that, or untick that actually, and press OK, then we see that the nulls disappeared. And this means if we now load that data into our data model, I will show you how this works in this video, of course, well, then these null rows will not be part of the data model, which is great. Again, you can also see the applied step, these filtered rows right here. So if I undo it like that, you can see it again. Then we have to filter it, press the null, and then it's out of that rows actually again. Now, this is the basic workflow that you have in the query editor. You have your queries right here, you have your information displayed in the center, and you have the applied steps in that right column. And up here, you have different options how you want to work with your data. Now, talking about working with data, we see that we now finished that second query right here, or that third query actually. Let's now take a look at the fourth query also. Well, right here we can see that everything looks alright. Again, it's important that the state again is the same that we had in the third query, but again related to the distance and related to the revenue. Now with that, we finished our initial cleaning. But there is more that I would like to do before we load the data into the data model. The first thing maybe is to bring some structure into this query column right here. So maybe let's create a folder. To do this, we can simply right click right here and click onto new group, like that. So let's name this group maybe taxi, rides, and passengers, like that, and press enter. And now we see that a new group or a new folder was created right here. And if we now simply drag and drop this one and that query right here, well, then we see that we have some structure right there. Let's maybe create a second folder right here and call that taxi revenue maybe, and press enter. And now select these two files and drag them right there. Now we have some structure in here. Of course, this depends on your personal preferences, but I'd like to keep that query column quite structured because if you have lots of data in here, then it can get quite messy quite soon. To avoid that, grouping the data by using that folders actually is a nice way. So we have that folders and some structure right here, but that's not everything that I would like to do. Because as we saw, well, the information we have could actually be combined in one single query. Because we saw that we have for both years the information about the rides and the passengers and the revenues. Additionally, we see that, well, actually we could combine the state columns of the two queries we have into one single query. So what do we have to do? Well, we need to do two things. First, we need to be able to combine, for example, this query, so this taxi source 2013 query, with the taxi source 2013 revenue query. So simply add these columns right here. We then have to do the same thing with the taxi source 2014, because here we have the same structure. We have the two columns right here, and we want to add these columns right there to this initial query. Now, how can we do this? Well, the answer is really simple because Power BI has a great implemented function to do that. So let's select the taxi source 2014 query maybe, and now go to the home ribbon right here. And if you look at the right part now up here, you can see that combine field. And here you have two different options. You have merge queries and append queries. What does this mean? Well, merge queries simply means, in easy words, adding columns. And that's what we want to do first. Appending queries is something different. We will talk about that in a few minutes. But if you now click onto merge queries right here, like that, well, then you can see that you have your taxi source 2014 query and the different columns. Now, if you click right here, you can select the other queries that you have in your query editor. And in our case, we could select the taxi source 2014 revenue query, like that. Well, and if you now take a look at the structure, you can see that the date, if we click right here and right there, is kind of equal. So if you now simply click onto OK down here, then we can see that we added that new column in our taxi source 2014 query. Now, if you click onto the symbol right here, then you're able to, well, kind of expand that and by that add the columns to that query. Well, but we should first define which columns we need, because we don't need the date column because that's already right here. But we need all the other columns, this is fine. And we don't want to use the original column name as a prefix, so we can skip that. So if you now press OK right here, then you can see that we simply added these columns to our initial query. This means we now have all the information that is related to the year 2014 right here in that initial query. Now let's do the same thing for the taxi source 2014 query then. So let's select it. We are still in the home ribbon. Go to merge queries, select the taxi source 2014 revenue, select date, and select date right here. And again, you can see we matched all our rows, so this is perfectly fine. And if we now press OK right here, well, then we have the same structure actually. We simply have to click right here onto the symbol, unselect the date, of course, keep the use original column name as prefix option unselected, this is totally fine, and now press OK right here. And again, we can see that we now perfectly added these columns to our query. Now this is nice, but I'm still not happy. Because as I said, wouldn't it be great now to kind of create a new query which combines the information of that query, the taxi source 2014, and the taxi source 2014 query? I think it would. And now you have lots of different options how you can do this. I will just show you one option. So I will select the first query, the 2014 query, now right click it. Well, and now we have two options. Now we could duplicate that query or create a reference. Now what's the difference? Well, let's simply create both and then compare it. So if we click on to duplicate right here, like that, then we can see that new query right here. Let's again select it and now press reference right here. And again, we can see it right there. So this is the duplicate, this is the reference. Well, and if you look at the center of the screen, there is no difference if I switch between those two. But if you look at the applied steps right here, then there is a big difference. Because if I'm in the reference, which I'm doing right now, then you can only see one applied step, so the connection to the source file. But if I go to the duplicate, then you can see all the different steps applied to it again. And that's actually the difference. If you create a duplicate, then you duplicate everything of the initial query, including all the different steps. If you create a reference right here, then you simply refer to that initial query. So this means this query right here refers to that taxi source 2014 query. This means if I want to delete that now by right-clicking it and pressing delete, then I can do that because our referred query or our reference query, well, refers to this query. So let's press close right here because we don't want to delete that. Now I want to create that reference query because applying the steps once is totally fine. And this new reference query will now become our query that we want to use in our data model. Now saying that, we could do two things. The first thing is we could simply delete our duplicate query. So we right click it and press delete. Yes, we want to delete that. The second thing is we could again create a new folder right here and name it maybe taxi data model, because that's going to be the information that we will load into our data model then, and press enter. And now drag that query right here into this folder. And if you now simply select the name right here, then you could call that taxi model, for example, and press enter. And with that, we now renamed that query. Now, that's the first step, but we said that we want to combine the information of the year 2013 and of the year 2014. Now, if we select our new, model query and go to the home ribbon again, and then take another look at the combine section right there, then we talked about merge queries, but if we now talk about append queries, well, then this simply means that, we can add rows by using that command. So if you click onto that, like this, then you can define which table you want to append. Well, in our case, this should be the taxi source 2014 query, this one. And if you now press OK right here, then you can again see the applied step, so we appended the query. And if you now scroll down, then we can see that we now added our 2014 data to this query with all the columns. But of course, you have to make sure that the structure of the queries that you want to append is equal, which is the case. So this means you have the same columns and the same column names actually. So we got that, and this is great. And with that, we are almost done with our preparation in the query editor. Almost. Because there is one last thing that I would like to show you. I would like to create a new table. And this new table should include all the different weekday names, because we will need that later in our visuals. So how can we create such a new table? Well, we can simply do that by clicking Enter Data right here. I'm still in the home ribbon, so let's click that. Well, and now we can first define a name for this table, which could be, weekdays maybe. And then we can simply define a column name right here. This could be weekday number. and this could be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You will see in the next video why this becomes important. And if we now click onto the right arrow key on the keyboard, select the column name, and let's call this, well, weekday actually, then we will define that as 1, Monday, 2, Tuesday, 3, Wednesday, 4, Thursday, 5, Friday, 6, Saturday, and 7, Sunday, like that. Well, and with that, we now have our new table created, and if we press OK right now, right here, then you can see this table appearing right here in the other queries group. But we can simply drag that right here to our data model. And with that, we are now actually done with the work in our query editor. The only thing that we should make sure, and this is simply related to performance topics, we should only make sure that only the queries, and by that the tables that we created, are loaded into the data model that we actually need. What does this mean? Well, we only need these 2 tables in our model. All the other tables are important because otherwise, well, we couldn't create our taxi model query right here, but we don't need that tables in our data model. This simply means that if we click onto this first query right here and right click it and simply unselect that enable load option right here, well, then this table won't be loaded into the data model. I will show you that in a few seconds. The important thing is that if you right click right here, right there, and right there, right there, and that's it actually. Well, the important thing is that, as I said, this will increase the performance of your data model. Because again, the goal of this exercise is to really specify what information you want to have in your data model. Well, and with that, we are now done with the work in the query editor. And to now quit that and load the data into the data model, we simply have to press right here onto this close and apply button, like that. Now it takes a few seconds. Well, and now we are in our actual data model. And if you look at this fields column right here, and if you click right here to see all the columns in the tables, well, then you can see that we only loaded 2 tables into our data model, because for all the other tables, we unselected that enable load option. And by that, these tables are not visible in the data model. And with that, we now finished the work of our first part of the project. So the only thing we should do right now is we should save our progress. Well, and to do that, you simply go right here to the save button, select a folder where you want to save it to. I like to name it project taxi maybe, and press save. And with that, we are now done with the first part of our Power BI project. So we now have the information in our data model. Let's see what we can do in here in the next video.